Right, good morning, everyone. You're in the right place. This is our WorkBuzz hosted webinar on the biggest employee experience trends of 2021. And you're joined by myself, Dawn. I'm going to be your hostess with the mostess today, here to host and moderate the session. And I'm with my fabulous colleague, John, with his very bright shirt, to really bring to life our latest research. Let me just do some quick introductions first. John, do you want to move the slide on? John's driving today. So John is the key person today. He heads up our people science team here at WorkBuzz, and we're going to be presenting the findings from our latest state of employee engagement research. But just to give you a little bit of background on John, I feel really lucky to be here today with him. I think he's my partner in crime when it comes to all things WorkBuzz. But John joined us back in early 2021, actually, so had the full remote onboarding experience because of COVID. But we're really lucky to have him, and he's our principal consultant here to many of WorkBuzz's key clients. So John started his career as a junior researcher and worked his way up to director and head of employee research at lots of different researchers' houses over the years. And he brings 25 plus years experience in employee listening across both the public and private sectors. So you're in good hands today. But it's not just that background, it's the fact that to all the conversations that we have with our clients, he really brings a deep understanding of how to build and deliver successful employee listening programs. But what the results actually tell you to drive organizational success. So the research that we're sharing today absolutely influences the conversations that we have with our clients. And he's worked with many organizations over the years, including HS2, Crossrail, Eurotunnel, Aldi, Asda, Greggs, Morrison's. We have a standing joke at WorkBuzz that if we pick a client name, he's probably done your survey at some point. So a couple of other things that make me smile about John. One, obviously, is his choice in shirts. And secondly, is that did you know that he used to be in a boy band, no less? So you can pick his brains on that another time. But we're really lucky to have him. So I'm going to stop waffling now. We move on to the next slide. Just a couple of housekeeping rules for today. The webinar is being recorded and a copy of that will be emailed to you afterwards. So obviously take your notes, but you can go back to it, share with colleagues. If you've got a question, if you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer any questions at the end or potentially midway through if they're relevant to a topic that we're presenting at the time. And there's also going to be a poll that we're running today. So please get involved. We're sharing our research, but it'd also be great to get your perspectives on what you're seeing and hearing as well. So if we move on, the agenda for today, as we go through the research, is kind of is going to really cover kind of the main elements of the research that's come out. A little bit about WorkBuzz. If you haven't heard of us before, WorkBuzz is a platform to really help you gather real-time feedback from your people and improve employee engagement and retain your best talent. I think the pandemic has really shifted employee listening much further forward than we could ever have expected. And we work with some of these amazing clients on the right side of the screen. And actually some of the research today will show some of those trends in how regular employee listening has a strong correlation to increased engagement. So we're really excited to be with you today. Quick rattle through of the agenda, John. What to expect? What are HR's biggest challenges right now? See if these resonate with you. Second on the list is hybrid working. I think that's been the biggest shift that we've seen in the last 18 months and how companies are adapting to this and some of the challenges that we see ahead of us. Third on the list, we're going to be talking about the great employee engagement divide, kind of how that differs dependent on the type of organization that you work in and for, and the impact of listening and employee listening on that. And then fourthly, just looking at the impact of equality, diversity, inclusion and belonging and the impact that that can have on engagement as well. So that's the insights that we're going to be sharing today. And I'm going to hand you nicely over to John.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us all today. Lovely to meet you in the virtual sense. But just to give you an outline of the actual research that we did, so we could have turned to our own clients and our own employees that we survey. But the issue with that is most of our clients are obviously progressive because they're working with us and they're doing listening strategies. And there's lots of people out there who haven't had time to do listening over COVID or doing listening in-house, etc. So we wanted to get a flavour across lots of organisations who are and aren't doing listening and doing it in different ways over this period of time, over the previous 12 months. So the survey itself was conducted in July and August, and that's really important, like any survey or any piece of research, to put it into the context of what was happening to people, where were we on the COVID journey at that point in time, coming out of lockdown, etc., and all the challenges we were facing. So it should be a really good snapshot of organisations just coming out of COVID and the lockdown process. Not quite out of furlough yet, so that's another contextual thing we need to think about that period in time. So the survey was across 300 plus organisations participated, and we recruited from HR related sources and press. But the people that we spoke to and used in the research were organisation leaders, HR professionals, and senior people in the sort of HR and learning and internal comms field. So what we wanted to do, though, is focus purely on their biggest people challenges. So again, as I said, we could have focused on everything we already knew from our own employee research and speaking to our own clients, but we wanted to just cross-reference that against all these other people out there to make sure we understand the wider view on what are their challenges from the horse's mouth, if you will. So it is all about a problem shared. So one of the things we've all faced as HR people and professionals in general over this is possibly we felt a little bit lonely, a little bit intellectually lonely over this period of time, you know, all working remotely, or a lot of us working remotely, and trying to understand are the problems that we're facing the same problems that everyone else is facing, because we've had less chance to network, certainly in person. There's been lots of virtual webinars and things going on, a bit like this one, but we maybe not had the same opportunities to talk to each other and understand, are we all facing the same challenges? So it's really interesting that we started this whole piece of research with asking people, you know, what are your main challenges and what's keeping you up at night? So the big reveal, what are your top HR priorities right now? Now, there was a long list, so we're just picking the sort of top six. And it's interesting, actually, that the things at the bottom of this list, before we get on to the top 6 things, were around CSR and purely looking at recruiting younger talent for succession planning. So the reason potentially why things like recruiting younger talent isn't higher up the list is possibly because of number 4 on this list in terms of improving retention of employee talent. So most, if not all of the clients that we've been talking to say they've got a real issue with retention and attraction at the moment. So it's almost a case of beggars can't be choosers. It's nice to have in terms of thinking about succession planning and thinking about recruiting younger talent, but a lot of the organisations we work with are really, really struggling with just retention and recruitment in general. So it's just, we just need people, and we need people in our organisation to fill the gap of those that left. Hence why maybe the younger talent is more of a nice to have, and essentially it's just getting people in to do the work and resource up those organisations. In terms of that top 6 and in order, that basically drove the research because we wanted to then understand what those challenges are and then pick out the key findings around basically what's keeping you up at night as organisation leaders and HR professionals. So the first one is improving employee engagement and the overall employee experience, which is really good and interesting that that's top of the list, because often that drives so many of these other things on the list, which we will cover further on, things like diversity and inclusion in terms of the link with diversity journey and employee engagement. In terms of retention, well, obviously, if you're disengaged, you might be less likely to stay with your organisation. There's lots of studies that prove that. Things around making remote or hybrid work in terms of the link to that and employee experience and engagement, and what the expectations are both from employees and employees themselves on that. And this attracting great talent of any generation, well, wouldn't we want to work for a great organisation with super employee experience and high levels of employee engagement? We all want to be part of that success story. So a lot of these are very much interlinked. The second thing on the list is really important, supporting employee well-being and wellness. It's been a very difficult time for us all over COVID. In terms of, you know, health issues, family issues, we've seen a lot of things happening in our own families and wider to our own employees as well. So employee well-being is so important. And one of the key things that will come out as we go through this is this well-being thing in terms of where people are right now. So remember me saying the context of the survey in terms of the timing of that survey. A lot of the conversations we're having with our clients are just saying people are right at the limit of burnout. they're being stretched so thinly. And again, that links to things like the retention and attraction, because people have left their organisations, that gap hasn't been filled yet, or people struggling to fill the gaps. People are having to pick up the pieces when people leave. And it's really interesting because right now we need people to be at the most energized level to almost pull us out of COVID moving forward, where we might have had issues in certain sectors as well. Having people at that energized level is the most important thing moving forward. But the reality is that people are right at the stage of burnout when they actually need a break and time away from work and time with the family, and family has become far more important over COVID due to the waking up of their health and other things in people's lives. So there's a lot of things going on just in this one slide alone that we need to think about, and they're very much interlinked. So in terms of the KPIs that people are being measured on during the next 12 months, we've done this as a word cloud. So straight away, carrying on from the previous slide in terms of the HR priorities, thankfully, the same priorities that you're thinking about are the same things that you're being measured at in terms of the KPIs. Turnover and engagement and absence, three biggest words. Attendance in terms of sickness, productivity, performance, growth, are all on there as well. So turnover being the largest word in here. So there is debate at the moment. In fact, I just downloaded and read a report last night on saying, well, actually, is turnover real? Is it just all being hyped by the media? So the great resignation and the big shift and all these things that are out there on LinkedIn and in the press, is it real or not? So it'd be interesting in some of the questions that you asked, just to get a take on whether is it real or not for you. Are we just being overhyped like the petrol crisis? Was it real or was it not? Is your turnover actually higher than previously? Well, in real terms, as I said, lots of the conversations we're having is just organisation after organisation telling us they're at a drastic critical point in terms of turnover levels in their organisations and really struggling just to get headcount. And that's having that knock-on effect on other people in terms of their well-being, having to pick up the pieces. Managers are then having to step back into operational roles. They've got far less time actually to do the management part and the people management part of the job. So for us, and talking to our clients, it is very real. It isn't hyped. It'd be good to hear from you whether you feel it is hyped or not. Is it just the after effect of COVID that will die down? Is it something that we're facing long term? And previously to join in WorkBuzz, I actually did another piece of research about people's views as employees in their life priorities. And some of the biggest things that came out of that research, that people completely rebalanced their thinking on money versus work-life balance and happiness in life, and actually saying that money's not as important as it was. As long as I've got enough money, I'm actually more happy to have more time with my family and spend more time with family. That's become more important, which might have led to them people thinking differently about some high-powered jobs, working in particular careers, looking for careers which might not be as well paid, but gives them more time and flexibility with their families. So there is a lot of evidence out there around that. So it will be interesting for you to tell us maybe, whether that is real for you or not, that turnover item. And the other interesting thing in here is actually these are all outputs. So turnover is obviously a result of people thinking differently about their careers, leaving organisations potentially for reasons around well-being, and then low engagement driving turnover as well. But things like well-being, that's the input, turnover is the output. There wasn't much in here, and when we asked people around what you measured on, there were only 3 or 4 mentions of well-being being a KPI. So do we need to think differently potentially about measuring the inputs as KPIs rather than the outputs? So turnover is the output. Shouldn't we be measuring things like well-being? We need to have well-being at a certain level. We need to have these things in place around well-being, all the inputs that drive these outputs. So we definitely or potentially need to think differently about measuring inputs and having some of those as KPIs. Sport's a great learning from things like that. Often, in sport, you want to achieve a medal, but sports psychology isn't about achieving the medal. It's all the processes, making sure that you eat the right foods, make sure you do your training every day, make sure you've got the right recovery. People are measured on those things. And then the medal happens as a result of all those inputs. So maybe within HR, should we think differently about maybe measuring some of those inputs, which would then lead to those outputs? So on the list of our priorities was hybrid. And again, as I've said, there's reports out there arguing the case for or against hybrid. And one of the really interesting things over time, as Dawn said, I've had a long career in this, and this is a discussion that's been going on a long time around offering hybrid working and flexible working. And in the past, the employee themselves used to have to put forward a very, very strong case why they needed to work from home. And it was often related to things that were happening at home in terms of caring responsibilities and things like that at home. So they had to put forward a very strong case. That seems to have almost flipped on its head now in terms of the employer almost needs to give the employee a very valid reason why you need to come into work. Because most of our studies, the employees themselves saying, actually, I can work quite productively from home. If not, in some instances, I can work more productively. I'm enjoying not having to commute. Although actually I'm filling that commute time in with doing more work. So whereas I used to set off for work at 7 a.m. and not get to work till maybe 8:30 and then start work, I'm actually maybe logging on a little bit earlier and starting work at 7:30. And then I'm finishing a little bit later. But the benefit is I've not got all that commute time and all the stress of commuting and the expense of commuting. I can literally log off a bit later than previously and not have that commute time. And I can then go and have dinner with my family, which I couldn't do previously. I can my children or whatever it is, I can have more time with the family, whilst also the business is getting the benefit of me working a bit longer by logging on early and later. So it's almost a win-win. So hence employees are saying, give me a very valid reason why I need to come in. Now there are downsides, which we'll look at in terms of some of the things around connection and collaboration. So starting with the question, compared to 12 months ago, what do you consider more important to existing and prospective employees, which gives us a little bit of clue about the importance of hybrid or not. So asking HR professionals and leaders in terms of the importance to employees, flexible work-base and flexible working patterns were the top of this. Now, interesting, salary and benefits were right at the bottom of this list in terms of what employers in effect feel is important for their employees right now. So again, it goes back to that thing in terms of work-life balance and flexibility is far more important than outright pay and benefits. Now, the thing around flexible working is it's different for everyone, and we'll get into that, and it would be good to hear your thoughts. And a really good example is the difference between, say, Dawn and myself. And I've said this a few times, is that Dawn is an extrovert, hence probably why she's in the environment she's in and doing the job that she does in terms of networking. I'm very introverted. So I actually enjoy the time working from home, and I actually work with data a lot of the time where I really need focus time without distraction. So what's important to all employees isn't the same. So it's different for Dawn, for me, and I'm sure you find that you personally and people that you work with, although flexibility to one person is I want to work solely from home, to another person it might be a balance. So the thing around flexible working and the importance to different employees is people are different, and we increasingly, like customers, and this is something I've seen over my career, looking at employees is increasingly becoming more like how we view customers in terms of segmentation and profiling. So in the past, we used to just send communications out to all employees in the same format. In the past, we maybe just delivered training to all employees in the same way. We don't do that with customer communication. We don't do that in terms of targeting customers all in the same way. We segment customers and we profile customers. So do we need to start doing more and more of that, increasingly so, in terms of viewing employees as being in segments, in terms of the extroverts versus the introverts? And the starting point is, do we understand enough about our employees on that individual level to then start targeting and putting them in segments and treating them in different ways that each person needs for their own needs and desires and personality traits?
And I think, just to add to that, I think with the clients that we're working with, it's definitely the ones that are doing well with hybrid are the ones that are not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. So to your point, it's more about personalisation. And I think the frameworks that I've seen are the hybrid working principles, and I really like that terminology because it's not about saying this is it and this is the only way. It's about some guiding principles about what you come into the office for and what you do at home, and it's the task rather than focusing on that and where you're going to be the most productive. And I think companies that are guiding their hybrid working around that are seeing more successes. So just my 2 pence on that piece as well.
Definitely, and there is an imbalance as well between the studies that we've done when we ask employees, what do you want, versus then what happens. So a lot of studies, and you can read these out there, our own studies and other studies, is a lot of employees actually weighted more towards saying, actually, you only want to be in the office 1 or 2 days. And in reality, many of our clients are actually saying now we've got principles where we sort of are more expecting people potentially to come in more like 3 days a week. So it's more weighted over to that side. But it's definitely about finding that middle ground, and some people might want to be in 5 days, some people only 2, but it's about outcome based, not input based in this instance, in terms of, are you still delivering to the same level irrespective of where you're working from the office or not. The shift that's been happening over many times, instead of presenteeism, actually looking at the outcomes that a person delivers, and then what fits for that individual to get the best outcomes from that individual. So employees' effort to support well-being is very important again, and thankfully, this is asking employers what you consider more important to existing and prospective employees. The fact that well-being is number 3 on this list is good, that people are picking up the importance of well-being, and the fact that they understand that people are potentially at the risk of burnout as well. And a great company culture is culture eats strategy for breakfast, or whatever they're saying it's very much true. For organizations thrive and succeed having a great culture. Now, one thing on culture as well is, this is an interesting one, is a lot of organizations don't truly understand their own culture, and they don't truly understand what a successful culture is. They think they know what it might be and guess. And why guess when you can evidence it? So by listening to employees and talking to employees, you can establish what the current culture is and what the future culture needs to be, and also talking to your clients and looking at what success is in terms of culture. So evidence it instead of guessing when it comes to culture. And it's the same for management capability as well. Don't guess when you can measure is the resounding thing that we should think about. Quality and diversity as well. So we've said that's on our HR priorities, but it's also very important for employees. And then personal development and growth. From all the exit survey data that I've seen, growth and development is always in the top 2 reasons for exiting a business. Growth and development is so important, and that's really, really different for different people as well. Some people are happy to stay in the same role, but grow in terms of developing their skill set. Some people want to be the next chief exec. So again, it's all pointing, whether it's flexibility, whether it's well-being, whether it's culture, whether it's diversity, whether it's development and growth, in this thing around personas and segmentation and understanding people on an individual level and what makes them tick.
And just on that last point, I think that's harder to do in a hybrid world as well, isn't it? Because a lot of career development is around visibility.
Yeah, so that
it's how we adapt to make sure that people are visible and what they do is visible. So it's how, yeah, definitely how we adapt to that as well.
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest challenges, yes, definitely around hybrid working, and in all the evidence-based studies that I've read, that is probably one of the biggest negatives of hybrid working in terms of career progression. Lots of people, I remember early on in my career, most of my learning was done by overhearing conversations by more experienced people, and hearing them, how they related to clients on the phone and all those kind of things. So how do we do that for people when they're working remotely? It's very difficult to do. Sitting with Nelly, I think the old phrase that's used, and sitting with someone more experienced and just being able to turn to them to the side and ask them a question that can be answered very quickly. At the moment, you'd have to phone them on Slack and try and get hold of them and check the diary, see whether they're in the meeting, versus I can just look and see that such a body is sat there and I can just ask them the question because I can see they're not on the phone.
Just as a follow-up to this, I'll share a link in the emails that we share the recording on around proximity bias as well. It's an actual thing, but it's a really interesting read as well.
So in terms of, we ask people, what is your normal working arrangement, and then what are your future working arrangements going to be? So where people were normally office-based, 83% said they're going to move to some form of hybrid, whether that's hybrid working or individual flexibility or pure remote working. So that's a huge amount, saying from an office-based background, that are going to move to some form of hybrid. Where population said, well, we've got mostly an on-site or physically delivering a service workforce, that drops to 42%. Thereabouts in terms of moving to some form of hybrid or flexibility, and 50% that work on site or with mostly on-site working populations are making no changes. So that this raises a very important question in terms of the divide between where you've got people who can and can't work remotely. And what do you do about that? So what are the benefits about working remotely? From those who have worked remotely, well, it's financial benefit because you've not got to commute. You don't have to spend money on your lunches every day. You can use the leftovers from yesterday, as I do pretty much every day. So I like to spend far less financially in not having to go to an office environment. And then to me personally, I get well-being improvements because I've got 4 animals, 2 dogs, 2 cats, and youngish children as well around. So being able to balance my life around that, being able to take the dogs for a walk at lunchtime, being able to go for a run at lunchtime, put the washing in, and all these other things is all work-life balance related. So mainly financial, mainly work-life balance related. So if you've got a population where you're going to offer hybrid to some people, but others can't do that because they are maybe working in retail or manufacturing or construction or have to attend a site or out on client visits and have to do that as part of the job, how do you balance the financial rewards and the work-life balance rewards for those people? So of the people we've been speaking to where they're trying to balance that under those headings for people who have to go in and deliver a service or have to go into an on-site and can't do remote, can you shift things around to help them in terms of their work-life balance? Can you maybe offer more flexibility in rotas? There's lots of people out there in retail are moving to a 4-day week. Can you do compressed hours? What can you do to improve the work-life balance in terms of offering them more breaks and more time down? In things in terms of well-being improvement, access to gyms and vouchers and all the rest of it for well-being, but really it's time for the family, remember, that people want. So how can we give people time back to spend with their families and have downtime where they can take a break? And then financially, well, is it a hand in the pocket then? So if I'm getting a financial reward because I don't have to commute to work, then what can we then give to somebody who has to go into work every day to balance that off if I'm now allowed to be working remotely? Because there's already generally a them and us divide between those who can and can't. Ivory towers, you see this all the time in employee surveys, people working in manufacturing or construction or retail saying, oh, those in ivory towers, isn't it wonderful for them? They can all work from home and all the rest of it. And just in general, pre-COVID, just saying those in ivory towers, oh, blah, blah, blah. So it will only widen the divide if we can't offer the same benefits in some way, shape or form to people. If we are going to offer hybrid to some and others can't take that up, then what can we give to those people? Otherwise, we will widen that divide. So in terms of your biggest hybrid working challenges for those that can offer hybrid, so it's around this emotional connection, collaboration, well-being and culture. So ensuring people still feel connected to each other in the company on an emotional level. So there was a whole load more questions asked in the survey, and one of them was sort of more open in context and asking people, what do you mean around this? Quite a lot of people were saying, well, actually, we're maybe losing the emotional connection and this team spirit sometimes with working hybrid. We can't just have those water coolers, American phrase, but we can't have the sort of coffee machine or the chats that we used to have in terms of that connection and that laugh that we had in the office or the work environment. So maybe we're going to lose that, and that's something we need to ensure that we carry on. And there are remote ways of doing that, and then the balance of having people sometimes in the office or not, and making sure we do some fun events online. So there was a big thing, wasn't the first off in remote working, those that did it, in terms of all these online quizzes and things like that. There's loads of things out there, but it needs to be more genuine rather than false and forced. And how can we do that in terms of keeping that connection between people when we're working remotely? So identifying and supporting mental health and well-being needs. So a lot of the mental health training that you see is around spotting changes in behaviour is the main thing for anybody that's become a mental health first aider. One of the main things that you're taught is around spotting those changes. John's normally chirpy and he's been a bit down the last few times I've spoken to him. Is there something wrong? And if John's working remotely, then do I pick up on those cues? So how can we still pick up on those kind of cues where we don't see John every day and John's working away and working remotely? So how can we still do that and identify and support those mental health and well-being needs with a remote workforce? Very, very difficult to do. And then would people actually, when we survey them, how can we make sure they feel trusted to raise any concerns they might have on an individual level, Because yes, I work for a company doing employee research and surveys, but if the anonymity is locked down to the survey to say 5 respondents, then I might not pick up on John because he's in a team of 5, and I can see that somebody's struggling in that team of 5 and I don't quite know who it is. So there needs to be other ways around not only listening through surveys, but individual cues in enough time spent as managers with people to pick up on those cues if you are working remotely. Nurturing the right culture, very difficult one to do again when you're working remotely. So your culture, you feed off each other and you bounce off each other when you're in an office environment. Far harder to do when you're working remotely, although again, there are tools out there. But even did we understand the culture even before we went remote? That's a question I've been asking, because a lot of organisations don't. And one of the questions we often ask in our own surveys is, what 3 words would describe the culture of your organisation? And then what 3 words would you like to see as the most optimum culture for your organisation? And then how can we move from that position to the future position? So there are certain things you can do, but just losing that collaboration and that bouncing off each other is a challenge for us. How do we keep that up when we're working remotely? And then on to the next one linked to that is that collaboration, especially when you're managing projects. Now, thankfully, I come from sort of an agile background where it's normal to work on Jira and Trello and things like this in managing projects, but not everybody comes from that background. And they've previously had the sort of work ways of working of having to sit down in an office and whiteboard everything and do it that way. So it's maybe new ways of working that need to be learnt around collaboration, especially when you're managing projects, using some of the principles of things like agile. Understanding how our people are feeling and doing is very much linked to the second thing as well. So yes, surveys are great, but that one-to-one and that interaction and that spotting cues for your remote working and virtual meetings is very important. And this final one, avoiding loneliness of hybrid and remote workers. So again, back to Dawn and myself, I often don't feel lonely just because I'm an introvert, so I'm happy with my own space and my own time. Whereas Dawn, how do you feel working remotely? As soon as that happened and you had to work and you couldn't come into the office, how did you feel?
Awful. And I was like a woman unleashed, I think, when I got back into the office. And I think it made me realise how much energy I get from being with people. So the last 18 months have been tough, to be honest, but really enjoying being back. But I think I've changed as well. I like that balance now as well. So I think there's a realisation that actually I can be more productive doing certain types of things when I'm on my own, but actually when it is to do with ideas, when it's to do with sharing, when it's to do with creativity, then I'm much better when I'm with people. So like you said, it's just very different. And I think the most important thing out of all of this is it's never been more important to know the people that you work with and for, and just ask those questions, keep asking, are you okay? And again and again and again, just to make sure they really are.
And it's loneliness as well, intellectual loneliness of even, us as professionals as well, where we could bounce off each other. So this hybrid working thing, previous to COVID, very few organisations maybe been offering this. And there was lots of kickback from executives when I was presenting results, employees saying that I want flexible working, and the employee was saying, well, actually, we haven't got the technology and we can't collaborate. And then that hand has been forced over time, but there's far fewer networking opportunities now to bounce off each other as professionals. And hybrid isn't something that we can just refer back to a previous white paper on in terms of, academia. Lots of times we can say, what happened in the last financial crisis? What can we learn from the next financial crisis? But because hybrid is relatively new in the way it happened for us, we almost need to bounce off each other in terms of getting through this and asking other organisations, what can we learn from you? What are you doing differently? And share the problem and talk to each other. And we did a few networking events recently where that was very, very true in terms of people say, oh my God, can't believe you're facing the same challenges and what are you doing? And really learning from each other in terms of how to avoid loneliness and how to face this whole challenge of hybrid working and what's working for you and what can we learn and what can we share, a problem halved and all that.
Right, John, we've got 10 minutes left, so I think we need
we get to the poll. So we will give you the answer to this from our own survey. So during the last year, we want you to complete the survey. Has your employee engagement increased, stayed the same, or declined in your organisation?
think everyone's just answering, so just bear with us. Is it working? I think our poll functionality is not working, so we won't do the big reveal today. We'll move on to the next slide. Johnny, do you want to share what it came in our research?
Okay. There's one of the benefits of remote working, isn't it? The technology might not always work. Okay, so asking that same question to the 300 plus organizations. Very much is an engagement divide in terms of an equal percentage states increased or declined, 22% stayed the same. But remember, this is a wide poll casting not just our own clients, where most of our own clients actually engagement did initially increase over COVID because people were happy to have a job and still have a job, and they were being listened to via the surveys. So taking that a stage further and breaking down the results to that question by office-based or mix of office-based and frontline workers in terms of where people have been working. So where you've been mostly office-based, slightly more weighted to engagement increasing, where you've got a mixed population of office and frontline workers, a bit more balanced, but frontline and on-site workers far more likely to say that engagement declined. So where you've had populations that had to work on-site, deliver a physical service, far more likely in those organisations to say engagement has declined. And that's common as well to the discussions we're having. So all those people who still had to go into a site, still had to face health risk and bring health risk into their families. They might have had vulnerable people at home, but they still had to go into work and maybe bring the risk of COVID back into their homes after. Endemics and all these other things they had to face. So a lot of the clients that we're speaking to that have frontline workers and on-site say a lot of their on-site workers are definitely at the risk of burnout and had to pick up all the pieces during COVID. Now, in terms of listening strategy, we asked this question in the State of Engagement 2018 in terms of how people are listening to their people. Is it every 18 months or less frequent annually? And so back in 2018, by far and away, the biggest answer was around the annual survey. 2021, it's very much changed, and has COVID accelerated the shift towards more regular listening? So you can see the annual survey has gone down by 20 odd percentage points. And then pulse surveys quarterly has drastically increased to 28%. So this well-being and picking up on the cues and all the other things we've discussed so far, more frequent listening is definitely more important now. And you can see that being borne out in terms of the listening strategies. Monthly as well is slightly increasing and weekly slightly increasing, but definitely this pulse survey is far, far more pertinent and is probably taking over from the annual survey. So again, taking that same question a stage further and linking the two things together in terms of engagement increase or decline versus how people listen. So where you're doing a survey every 18 months or less frequently, 41% said engagement has decreased. Where you're in an annual survey, well, actually the balance is now more in favour of saying engagement is increasing. Quarterly pulse, which was, as you saw, growing very, very greatly on the previous slide, far more likely to say engagements increased, and monthly pulse the same as well. So there seems to be a correlation between more frequent listening and engagement increase, showing a more progressive listening strategy in those organisations. Probably more greater focus on well-being. And when we ask some of the open questions around this in terms of what is the difference and why engagement has increased, many of the people that said engagement has increased was because they were doing more frequent listening. They were engaging more with their people, whether it be via a survey or any other. So of all the other things on the listening strategy, there's a whole load more. The basic message was those who are more progressive, where engagement increased, were just far more listening, and especially around other things like new joiners and onboarding, which has been a challenge for remote-based organisations. So in the final sections that we asked in the research is in terms of where people are on their equality journey, EDIB journey. So the journey is actually underpinned on this model, and we ask questions, in effect, where are you on that journey? Are you still sort of planning? Are you still learning? Are you actually acting and putting everything you planned for and learned and putting it into practice? Or are you realising in terms of you've gone through the whole journey and you're actually then maybe rethinking the strategy and then going to plan and act again. You can actually get a link to an ebook that we've got at WorkBuzz. So if you go onto the workbuzz.com website, you can download our EDIB book, which is underpinned by this model, written by my great colleague Mel. So in terms of where people are on that journey, the majority were at the learn and plan stage. Over half people are at that stage, and the bottom one's very disappointing. So almost 20% are nowhere on the EDIB journey. 2 in 10 haven't even started. Really disappointing. And it tended actually to be organisations which were more with an on-site based population, where we're less progressive in terms of the EDIB journey. And the argument against that is lots of operational companies where they've had on-site workforces said, well, we've just been keeping the lights and we've had so many issues with resourcing over this period in COVID and pandemic that we've struggled to do anything other than just keep the lights on. But pre-COVID, based on my experience, they were actually still less progressive on things like EDIB as well. So linking again, engagement to EDIB journey stage, those who are still learning, more likely to say engagement has declined. Those who are at the planning stage, the next stage along, now increased engagement is taken over for declining, so more progressive, more likely to say that engagement has increased. Further along the EDIB journey, far more likely to now say we're engaged. Then at the realise the final stage, very similar to the act stage, although look at the drop in engagement declining for those organisations, far more progressive. But the big part of this is where you are nowhere on your EDIB journey, far more likely to say engagement has declined. So there is a link between engagement increasing and where you are on the EDIB journey. There's also a link in terms of frequency of listening, far more likely to be listening to your employees and far more likely to be a more progressive company in many ways. So in summary, to pull this all together, we definitely all seem to be facing the same challenges on improving engagement, attrition, diversity, and definitely well-being and hybrid. So back to a problem, problem shared is a problem halved, and this loneliness, it's good. And where we've shared this with people in person, they've said, oh my God, I can't believe everybody's feeling the same way and facing these same challenges. I've not had a chance to talk to other people in environments to discuss this, but it's really good to know we are facing the same challenges. Is flexible working is now more of an expectation than a nice to have. Is that going to last forever though? That's another query and a question. Is this a flash in the pan, this flexible working? Will we ever go back to pre-COVID where we expect everybody to be in the workplace 5 days a week or whatever it might be? And the challenges around that fairness between on-site and office, and then connection, collaboration, keeping the culture going and looking out for each other in terms of well-being and spotting those cues are all the challenges of moving to hybrid. Engagement and well-being is definitely a challenge for us all, especially for on-site workers. So as I said, lots of our clients with on-site workers just saying people are absolutely right on the limit of being burnt out when we actually need them to be energized to move us forward out of COVID. So frequent listening is so essential to make sure people don't cross over in terms of that true burnout stage. And just a bit of background, that engagement strategy came from burnout research in the first place. I actually had to write a paper for a client once who asked the question, where did engagement come from? And it was actually in the NHS and the care profession. They looked into what burnt out people and then realised the things that counteract burnout were actually the things that drive engagement. Hence, that's where the term engagement was originally founded. And EDIB powers engagement and flagged the more progressive organisations in terms of other things like their listening strategy and how they look after their people in terms of well-being. So that's everything from myself, and obviously there's far more in the report itself, going into more detail on the things that we've discussed today. But I hope you've enjoyed the discussion and all the points that we've covered in there. And hopefully and thankfully, it's just giving you some reassurance that some of your own worries are the worries of many of us at the moment, and we need to work together to get us through many of these worries and move us forwards.
We just go on to the next slide. We've nicely rounded that up on the 45-minute mark. So well done, John, because John is renowned for talking too much, to be fair. But that's been super powerful, even for me, having listened to it before. I think every time I hear you speak, there's different nuggets that come out. But if anyone on the call today is interested in having a conversation with us, really to dig deeper into that research and to talk through your own challenges and how they relate to our experiences, then there's 3 40-minute slots on offer today on a first come first served basis. So just pop an email through to hello@workbuzz.com and myself and John would be happy to jump on a call, and we promise John will wear an equally wacky shirt if that happens as well. So a big thank you for taking part today, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.